A cold wind moved through the glass corridors of Stockholm Arlanda Airport the morning Johan left. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, their voices echoing softly under the high ceiling. I stood there holding his hand, tears slipping down my face. 2 years will pass quickly, Johan whispered, brushing my hair behind my ear. The Oslo project is important for my career and for our future. I nodded, burying my face in his coat as if I couldn't bear the thought of him leaving. To anyone watching, I was simply a devoted wife saying goodbye to her husband. But the truth was far more complicated. 3 days earlier, I had seen something I was never meant to see. A quiet afternoon in Gamla stan, a cafe window, and Johan's hand resting gently on another woman's arm. And they laughed together in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. That moment changed everything. When the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, Johan kissed my forehead and walked toward security. "Wait for me," he said with a smile. I watched him disappear into the crowd and slowly wiped the tears from my face. Because the moment I returned to our apartment in Södermalm, I opened my banking app and transferred 7 million kroner from our joint account. Every single krona. If you've ever wondered how a marriage can collapse in a single week, stay with me. Because Johan believed he was leaving Stockholm to start a new life. What he didn't know was that my plan had already begun. And the first move would destroy everything he thought he controlled. The taxi ride from Arlanda Airport back to Stockholm felt strangely quiet. Outside the window, the city looked exactly as it always did. Orderly streets, bicycles leaning against stone buildings, people walking their dogs despite the cold wind from the Baltic. Everything appeared calm. But inside my chest, something had already ended. Johan and I had been married for 5 years. We lived in a modest but beautiful apartment in Södermalm, close enough to the water that we could walk along the harbor every evening during the summer. From the outside, our life probably looked like the kind many couples in Stockholm dream about. Stable, comfortable, predictable. I worked as an interior architect at a small design studio near Östermalm. My days were filled with sketches, materials, and meetings with clients who wanted their homes to feel warmer, calmer, more Scandinavian, as they like to say. Johan worked for a fast-growing technology consulting firm. He was ambitious, always talking about projects, promotions, and the next big opportunity. When he told me about the 2-year assignment in Oslo, he spoke about it like a turning point in his career. "If this project succeeds," he had said one evening while we cooked dinner together, "we could finally afford a larger apartment, maybe even a summer house somewhere in the archipelago." I believed him. For years, I deposited my salary into our joint account, trusting him when he said it was easier for financial planning. He handled the investments, the savings, everything. I never questioned it. Looking back now, I realize how convenient that must have been for him. When the taxi stopped outside our building that morning, the apartment greeted me with a familiar silence. Johan's slippers were still by the door. His coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. For a moment, I simply stood there. Then I opened my phone, logged into the bank, and looked at the balance. 7 million kroner. 5 years of work. 5 years of trust. My finger hovered above the transfer button, because 3 days earlier, on a quiet street in Gamla stan, I had seen something that made me understand exactly why Johan was suddenly so eager to move to Oslo. 3 days before Johan's departure, my day had ended earlier than usual. A client meeting near Gamla stan had been cancelled, and I decided to walk through the old streets before heading home. The late afternoon sun reflected softly on the cobblestones, and the cafes were busy with the quiet rhythm of Stockholm life. That was when I saw him. Johan was sitting by the window of a small cafe on Stora Nygatan. At first I almost smiled, thinking I had found him by coincidence. But the woman sitting across from him wasn't someone I recognized. She leaned forward, laughing softly, her hand resting on his arm in a way that felt intimate, too familiar. I stopped walking. Through the glass, I watched Johann tilt his head closer to her. He said something that made her laugh again. Then he reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture he hadn't made to me in years. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Colleague, client, friend. But then the waiter brought 2 glasses of wine, and Johann raised his glass with a smile I hadn't seen at home for a long time. My heart started pounding so loudly I thought someone passing by might hear it. I stepped back into the shadow of a nearby doorway and watched them leave the cafe 20 minutes later. They didn't see me. Outside, Johann placed his coat around her shoulders against the cold wind. She slipped her arm through his. Not a hesitant gesture. Not a misunderstanding. They walked down the narrow street together, slow and comfortable, like people who had done this many times before. I stood there frozen. That night, when Johann came home, he kissed my cheek as usual. "Late meeting," he said casually while hanging his coat. I looked at him across the kitchen table while he ate the dinner I had prepared. For the first time in 5 years, the man sitting across from me felt like a complete stranger. So the next morning, I did something I had never imagined I would do. I hired a private investigator. And 1 week later, he handed me an envelope that would make everything explode. A week later, I met the investigator in a quiet cafe near Kungsträdgården. His name was Lars Nyström, a calm man in his 40s who spoke very little. When he placed the thick envelope on the table between us, he didn't say anything at first. He simply pushed it toward me. "You should look at it when you're ready," he said gently. My hands felt strangely cold as I opened it. The first photo was enough. Johann and the same woman from Gamla stan were walking together along the waterfront in Djurgården, their fingers intertwined like a couple who had nothing to hide. Another photo showed them entering a boutique hotel near Norrmalm late in the evening. Then came more. Dinner dates, shopping trips, weekend outings. Each photo quietly dismantled the marriage I thought I understood. Her name, according to Lars's report, was Sophia Lind, the new marketing director at Johann's company. They had been seeing each other for almost 3 months. But the photos were not the worst part. The worst part was the documents. Screenshots of messages, bank records, property contracts. Johann wasn't just planning to work in Oslo. He had already transferred money from our joint account as a down payment for an apartment there. And according to the messages, the plan was painfully clear. He would move first. 6 months later, he would tell me he had met someone else. A clean, quiet divorce. No scandal, no conflict. Just a naive wife left behind in Stockholm. I remember sitting there in that cafe, staring at the papers while the normal world continued outside the window. People walking, children laughing, trams passing slowly through the city. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a well-organized exit strategy. Lars watched me carefully. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. I folded the documents back into the envelope and took a slow breath. "I'm going to let him believe everything is going exactly according to his plan." Lars raised an eyebrow slightly, because what Johann didn't realize was that the moment I saw those documents, the story between us had already changed. And his carefully designed escape was about to collapse in a way he would never see coming. The transfer took less than 30 seconds. When the confirmation appeared on my phone, the 7 million kroner that had once belonged to both of us now sat safely in my personal account. For the first time in days, I could breathe again. 2 hours later, I sat across from Anna Bergström, a family lawyer whose office overlooked a quiet street near Humlegården. The thick envelope from Lars rested on the table between us. Anna studied the document slowly, her expression growing sharper with every page. "Your husband planned this very carefully," she finally said. "He intended to move the assets abroad, establish residency, and file for divorce later. If you had waited, you might have lost most of it." Her words confirmed what I already feared. But then she paused on one particular document. "Did you know about this?" she asked. I leaned forward. It was a financial report from Johann's company, one Lars had managed to obtain during the investigation. My eyes scanned the page once, then again. The room suddenly felt smaller. And the money Johann had been transferring, the investments he claimed were for our future, were tied to something else entirely. A series of high-risk private investment funds registered through shell companies. Anna's voice grew quieter. "These funds are under investigation in Norway and Sweden," she said carefully. "There are early signs of financial misconduct." I stared at her. "You mean fraud?" Anna didn't answer directly, but the silence said enough. For a moment, I thought the worst part of my marriage had already been revealed. The betrayal, the lies, the careful plan to replace me. I was wrong. Because according to the documents in front of me, Johann's relationship with Sophia wasn't just an affair. They were both connected to the same investment network. Which meant the man I had been married to for 5 years might not only have betrayed me, he might have been building his entire life on something far more dangerous. Anna closed the file slowly. "If the authorities move forward with this case," she said, looking directly at me, "your husband's problems are only beginning." And in that moment, I realized something chilling. The story between Johann and me wasn't ending with a divorce. It was only beginning to unravel. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within months, Norwegian and Swedish authorities began uncovering the truth behind the investment network Johann had quietly joined. Several accounts were frozen. Financial records were examined. One by one, the pieces of his carefully constructed life began to fall apart. By the time the court finalized our divorce, and the future Johann had imagined in Oslo was already collapsing. Sophia disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered it. The apartment he bought was seized during the investigation, and the ambitious project he once described with shining eyes simply vanished. Meanwhile, my life grew quieter. I renovated my apartment in Södermalm, filling it with warm wood, soft light, and the kind of calm I had not felt in years. Work slowly became something I enjoyed again. Even the long walks along the harbor felt different, as if the city itself had become lighter. One evening, nearly 2 years later, I heard that Johann had left Norway alone. No promotion, no new life, just consequences. But by then, his story no longer belonged to me, because somewhere between betrayal and rebuilding, I had become someone stronger than the woman who once cried at Arlanda Airport, and that change was the only ending I truly needed. Life has a quiet way of teaching us difficult lessons. For many of us, especially after 35, we begin to understand that love is not only about emotion, it is also about honesty, responsibility, and mutual respect. Without those foundations, even the most beautiful relationship eventually cracks. I once believed that trusting someone completely was the purest form of love. Now I understand something more balanced. Trust is important, but so is protecting your own independence, your dignity, and your voice. A healthy relationship should never require you to disappear inside it. Sometimes the most painful moments in life, betrayal, loss, disappointment, become turning points. They force us to step back, to look at ourselves honestly, and to rebuild our lives with clearer eyes. Strength rarely arrives loudly. Often it grows quietly, in small decisions made day after day. Choosing self-respect, choosing calm over bitterness, choosing a future instead of staying trapped in the past. And perhaps the most important truth is this: when someone leaves your life by breaking your trust, they are not taking your happiness with them. They are simply making space for a better chapter to begin.